So just to note that this presentation, my goal is to teach people how I recommend you referee and how you train your referees. I'm not going to be going over specific rule questions and rule clarifications. We have the Slack group set up so that you can ask questions there. And then next week, we're also going to be having a drivers meeting. So those questions will be answered in time. I'm not going away, but today we're going to focus on how to referee. So Dave, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So for all my referees, I recommend that you start watching or start preparing to referee by watching the game animation. It's good to know what the basics of the game is so that you understand how the flow of the matches will go and what the goals are. HQ has put out a really good video on how to do remote gameplay and how the flow of the matches work as remote instead of in-person events. They also point out some specific rules that you should watch for as you referee. So I really recommend that you start your learning of how to referee with these two videos. And then on the next slide, I go over the manuals. So you need to know the rules if you want to ref them. So the starting point to know the specific rules and what the penalties for them are is Game Manual Part 1 for remote events. For this specific manual, I recommend that at minimum you read section 3.4 competition definitions and 3.5 competition rules. And then on the next slide, I've shown Game Manual Part 2 for remote events. This is a really detailed manual on most of the game rules, so I recommend that you read all of it. Maybe break it down into a couple days, but definitely read all of it. The next thing that I suggest you read is the Q&A forum. Within FTC, as stated in section 4.1, the forum rulings take precedence over the game manuals, so it's really good to check those out too. Normally the game manual is updated if there's anything major that changes so that they kind of match. It's more that the forum really goes over specific rule clarifications and situations. So it is a really good resource to have. The next thing I suggest you do is, if you want to, an additional reading is the referee and head referee manual. It is a really good resource for volunteers like myself to understand what FIRST is looking for from a referee as a volunteer. If you don't want to read the whole thing, pages 13 to 28 are really good. Past that, it's more information that I think you need. But again, this is just additional. It's not necessarily required. The other ones I would definitely say are required in order to referee successfully. So once you've done your homework and you've done the readings, you've watched the videos, you are now prepared to actually attempt to referee at an event. So from an event perspective, there's often a scoring referee and a rules referee. You are both referees. You both need to know all of the information that I detailed before, but you kind of are doing two different tasks. So I recommend that you have two people refereeing, one designated as a scoring ref and one designated as a rules ref, because these two people are going to be watching two different things, and it's really hard to do both things as one person, especially if this is a role that you are new to and everyone's new to this game. So it's one of those things. So what the scoring ref is going to be looking at on the next slide, Dave. So the scoring ref, you need to know what counts as scored. So that's detailed in Game Manual Part 2 of remote events. And the things that can be scored are the robot, its position creates points, the rings, the power shots, and the wobble goals, all of the potential to be scored in some way, but they need to be scored in a certain way so that the points actually count. So with the power shots, the goals need to be pushed back by a ring. It can't be pushed back by a robot. So if you are looking out at the field and you say it's pushed back, it might not necessarily count as scored because it might not have been scored meeting the proper criteria. So you need to know what that criteria is before you score it. During the match, you also need to count the rings as the robot attempts to score, because there's no electronics that are going to total those during the match, and the rings are returned to the field as they're scored. So you need to be counting that real time. And then you don't have to keep all of this information in your head. There is a scoring sheet available. On the next slide, I have a picture of it. So this is a sheet that if you don't have the scoring software on a tablet, this is something that you can do just on paper and then transfer it to the scoring software later. So it depends on what type of Wi-Fi access you have and whatever. So the scoring sheet, you can see where you have the autonomous period. So the tower high, tower mid, and tower low. I suggest you do tallies. So where you do the tick for 4 and then you cross for 5 to count how many rings are scored. That way you're not constantly crossing off like 1 and then cross it off and do 2. So little things like that that you can do during the match quickly, because I often feel that looking down at a piece of paper or a tablet is kind of like texting while driving, because you're supposed to be watching the field, but you also need to count. So it's a challenging thing that I often get frustrated with, but do your best. You're only human. So yes, the rules ref. The rules ref, as I like to call them, they need to know the different zones of the field and what's allowed in them. So what counts as a penalty where. They also need to know how the different game pieces can be handled in terms of like the quantity of the game pieces and if they are allowed in certain areas of the field. Humans can incur penalties. So with all of those in mind, it means that during a match, you're going to be watching the coach, the drivers, the human players, the robot, and whatever the robot looks like it's going to be handling. So that's a lot to watch, but you can do it, and it's okay to like do practice matches. Definitely ref practice matches so that you can get practice. Record the penalties on the score sheet. So I recommend that the scoring ref be in control of the score sheet, but you should go and talk to them and be like, hey, this person or this team just got a penalty, and that's a major or a minor penalty. You might want to tell them what it is so that you can discuss it and get their confirmation that they saw it too. But if you're confident in your call, definitely put that down. And then all the scoring, or not all of the scoring, but a fair bit of the scoring is done at the end of the different periods. So definitely feel free to help the scoring ref with that. You guys are both reffing the match, so work together on it. I highly recommend that the rules ref print out, highlight, get really familiar with section 4.8 of the game manual part 2 remote events. Just, it's like a cheat sheet. So keep in mind that a cheat sheet doesn't have all of the information. It gives you a little bit, but if you're unsure of what that rule is suggesting from the cheat sheet, please go back and reference the full definition. The game manual and the Q&A resources are not going anywhere. Definitely look them up and read them over and over again. So just to keep in mind that as much as I keep saying there's the scoring ref and the rules ref, you're both still referees. So work together on it. Sometimes a scoring ref, because they're staring at the robot, because they're waiting for a shot, they'll see something that the rules ref might not see because they're looking from a different angle. And then the rules ref might not see a penalty. And because that scoring ref is looking right at it, just because you're labeled as the scoring ref doesn't mean that you can't call that penalty. And same for the rules ref. If you see something scored, speak up. And if you have 2 people who have both read and reviewed all of the resources that I stated, one of the best resources that you have is the other person who has read the same things as you. So feel free to consult each other to get different opinions, because sometimes the situation is very particular. But as always, when you're working together with someone, remember your gracious professionalism and politely disagree or politely agree, whatever that means. As always, First Canada is here to help. So we've set up the First Ontario support Slack group. So there's a channel dedicated for FTC rules questions. So I do monitor that. And if you have any rules questions, please post those there. We do have drivers meetings Thursdays before all the remote events. So there'll be time to ask plenty of questions there. And I will be doing just general rules that you guys should particularly look out for. And then we also set up this portal for match review. So this is a opportunity for teams to submit videos of a match for a referee to review. These reviews have no bearing on what the official match scores will be. This is just a learning opportunity for you to say, hey, did we score that right? And then a referee can come back and be like, yes, you did, but you might have missed something here. And that's something that you can take and use for your next official matches. It is only a learning resource. So any questions?
All right, thank you, Mickey. One question we do have is, can you have different refs from one match to the next?
I see no problem with that. The team gets to decide that. So if you as a team decide that that's what you want to do to give more people opportunities, that's fantastic. In terms of having consistency between the matches, that might be something that a team's concerned about, but that's really up to what the team wants.